proceed on the protocol so well established by Mayor Mamdani and just say, you're welcome, brothers and sisters. Amongst people of African descent throughout the diaspora, as well as indigenous Africans on the continent, the collective rituals surrounding death are a communal experience, from its announcement to its recognition through ceremony. If you travel to Africa, from the top of the continent to the bottom, in most cities, towns, and villages, you will see notices of people's death, not small obituaries in newspapers, but flyers, posters, and billboards plastered all around. Listed on them is usually a litany of names of the bereaved, not just immediate relatives, but also names of extended family members, whether local or living abroad, and tribal or community leaders. All of these people to whom the deceased belong are listed on the obituary notices. And the funeral services are often attended by people who were not even personally acquainted with the deceased. That's because in Africa, we do not mourn as individuals. We mourn as community. We mourn as families. We mourn as nations. In this case, we're mourning an entire community today. As the African Union champion on reparations, I'm here today on behalf of the 1.4 billion citizens of the African continent. We will lay down this wreath this morning to honor the memories of the nearly 20,000 Africans who are buried on these grounds, some of whom were free, but most of whom were enslaved. I cannot speak of the events that transpired here in New York without also mentioning the events that occurred on the African continent, especially in my homeland, Ghana. Those events are not separate stories, as we've been led to believe. They are parts of one single narrative, sometimes even happening concurrently. And it's a narrative that was quite literally branded, carved, burned, and beaten into the bones of people, human beings, including our ancestors who are buried here. Ghana has more than 30 slave forts and castles, more than any other African country. As such, there's a high probability that many of the African men and women and children who were enslaved came through, if not from, the land that is now known as Ghana. One of these forts is known as the Cromarty Fort. It was built by the British in 1631. Enslaved Africans were transported from there to the British colonies in the Caribbean and America. These individuals came to be referred to as the Coromantes. In 1665, the Cromarty Fort was captured by the Dutch as retribution because the British had seized many of its territories and holdings, such as the Dutch colony of New Amsterdam, which just a year earlier in 1664 had been taken by the British and renamed New York. This burial ground is believed to have been in use as early as the mid-1600s, but the first written record of its existence dates back to 1712. That year there was an uprising in New York led by the Coromantes, who gained a reputation across the so-called New World for being rebellious. It is both heartening and heartbreaking to contemplate the care, the attention to detail and sheer love which the people who were laid here went into their final resting place. They were buried this way so that through death they might finally, in the ancestral realm, receive all that they had been deprived of in the physical realm. So we lay this wreath in honor of those buried here who resisted domination and disrespect, and also in recognition of their valiant pursuit of freedom. What could possibly prepare any human being for the indignity of being stripped of their basic humanity, or being bought, kept, and sold as property? A half mile away from here, on the shore of the East River at Wall Street, which is considered the financial capital of the world, that is where the slave market was situated. That distance from the auction block to this burial ground, from the start of their new lives in America to the end of their natural lives in this world may have been brief in terms of miles and even in years, but was very long in suffering, misery, and pain. African people could not be buried in such cemeteries. They could not be buried in private cemeteries. They could not be buried where white people were buried. They could not even be buried in paupers' cemeteries, where the homeless, indigent, or incurably ill were buried. They could not bury their dead in the evenings. And when there was a burial, only a dozen or a few people were allowed to attend. So the deceased were even stripped of the public ceremony that was a customary rite in so many of the homelands from where they had been plucked. But we are here today as we were in 2003, when the remains of those who had been exhumed were reinterred. The coffins of those 419 individuals were handcrafted in Ghana. Carved into each one of these coffins was an Adinkra symbol. Many of those same symbols are etched into the monuments behind us. Adinkra is native to the Akan people of Ghana, or as they became known after they were enslaved, the Koromantis. Each of these symbols represents a proverb, a philosophical or moral truth. The Sankofa symbol represents an abbreviation of the proverb, Sewure free Nawasan Kofa Yinchi in the Akan language. The literal translation of this is that if you forget something, it's not a taboo for you to go back and get it. The proverb's essential meaning is that we must take the wisdom gained from the lessons of the past and use it in building the future. Tomorrow, the 25th of March, is the International Day of Remembrance of the victims of slavery and the Transatlantic Slave Trade. We will lay down this wreath in remembrance of all the victims of slavery and the Transatlantic Slave Trade, the men, women, and children who were taken from their lives and from those who loved them to be enslaved in a foreign land, and also the people to whom they belonged, the mothers, the fathers, the grandparents, and the children whose lives were forever altered after their parents, children, siblings were stolen from them and their communities. In furtherance of this remembrance, this recognition tomorrow, Ghana, on behalf of the African Union, CARICOM, and all persons of African descent, will table a resolution before the United Nations General Assembly to formally recognize the transatlantic slave trade and chattel slavery of people of African race as the gravest crime against humanity. And to affirm the principle as well as initiate the process of reparatory justice. My hands are frozen, My fingers are frozen. I got it. And so, we will lay down these wreaths today as a proper promise to our progeny that never again will such atrocities be visited on our people. Never again, never again. I thank you all for coming.